Two patients come with the same complaint, weakness. One has a stroke, and the other has Myasthenia gravis. Same symptom, but the problem is not at the same site. In one patient, the lesion is in the brain. In the other, the problem is at the neuromuscular junction. That is why clinical neuroanatomy is so important. We are not learning anatomy just to name structures. We are learning it to understand how different parts of the nervous system present in real patients. In this video, we will build a simple clinical map: brain, brainstem, spinal cord, peripheral nerve, neuromuscular junction, and muscle. Let's start with the first major division. Is the problem inside the central nervous system or outside it? Before we go further, pause and test yourself. A patient has bilateral leg weakness, a sensory level at the umbilicus, and urinary retention. What is the most likely site of the lesion? Is it the brain, spinal cord, peripheral nerve, or muscle? Pause here for a moment and try to localize it before the answer appears. The most likely site is the spinal cord. Let's break the clues one by one. First, bilateral leg weakness suggests involvement of motor tracts rather than a single peripheral nerve. Second, a sensory level at the umbilicus is a very important clue. A clear sensory level usually points towards spinal cord localization. Third, urinary retention suggests that autonomic pathways may also be involved. So the high-yield rule is weakness plus sensory level plus bladder involvement, think spinal cord. Now that we have identified this as a central nervous system lesion, let's separate central nervous system lesions further into brain, brainstem, and spinal cord. The next question is, if the lesion is inside the central nervous system, how do we know whether it is in the brain, brainstem, or spinal cord? For the brain or cortex, look for cortical signs. These include aphasia, seizures, neglect, or visual field defects. These signs tell us that higher brain functions are involved. For the brainstem, look for cranial nerve signs with crossed body findings. In exam terms, this means an ipsilateral cranial nerve palsy with contralateral weakness or sensory loss. In simple words, the face or eye sign may be on one side, while the body weakness or sensory loss is on the opposite side. For the spinal cord, look for a sensory level, bladder involvement, and upper motor neuron signs below the lesion. So the shortcut is simple. Cortical signs point to the brain, crossed signs point to the brainstem, and sensory level points to the spinal cord. Now let's test brainstem localization with an exam-style case. A patient has left 6 cranial nerve palsy, left lower motor neuron facial weakness, and right hemiparesis. Before seeing the answer, try to localize the lesion. Is it the left cerebral cortex, left brainstem, right spinal cord, or peripheral nerve? The hint is, look for crossed findings. The most likely site is the left brainstem. Let's decode the clues. Left 6th cranial nerve palsy means the left abducens nerve is involved. Cranial nerve signs usually localize to the same side of the brainstem lesion, so this points to the left side. Left lower motor neuron facial weakness is another cranial nerve sign on the left side, again supporting a left brainstem lesion. But the body weakness is on the right side. This happens because the corticospinal tract is affected before it crosses to the opposite side. So the high-yield rule is ipsilateral cranial nerve palsy plus contralateral hemiparesis, think brainstem lesion. Now that we can recognize central nervous system patterns, let's understand the motor pathway itself. A voluntary movement starts in the motor cortex, especially the precentral gyrus. From there, the impulse travels through the corona radiata and internal capsule, then descends through the brainstem. Most corticospinal fibers cross in the lower medulla at the pyramidal decussation. After crossing, they descend in the lateral corticospinal tract of the spinal cord. Then the upper motor neuron synapses on the lower motor neuron in the anterior horn cell. From the anterior horn cell onward, the lower motor neuron carries the impulse through the ventral root, spinal nerve, peripheral nerve, neuromuscular junction, and finally to the skeletal muscle. So the simplest rule is, upper motor neuron means cortex to anterior horn cell. Lower motor neuron means anterior horn cell to muscle. Once this pathway is clear, the clinical signs become much easier to understand. The upper motor neuron normally helps control spinal reflexes. You can think of it like a brake system from above. If the upper motor neuron is damaged, the brake is removed. The reflex arc is still intact, but it becomes uncontrolled and overactive. That is why upper motor neuron lesions produce increased tone, brisk reflexes, and an upgoing plantar response. In a lower motor neuron lesion, the problem is different. The In a lower motor neuron lesion, the problem is different. The lower motor neuron is the final pathway from the spinal cord to the muscle. If this pathway is damaged, it is like a wire being cut. The impulse cannot reach the muscle properly, and the reflex arc is broken. That is why lower motor neuron lesions produce reduced tone, reduced reflexes, marked wasting, and sometimes fasciculations. So remember the one-line concept. Upper motor neuron lesion means break removed. Lower motor neuron lesion means wire cut. Now let's convert this concept into exam-ready clinical signs. In an upper motor neuron pattern, the lesion is usually in the brain or spinal cord. Tone is increased. Reflexes are brisk. The plantar response is upgoing. Wasting is usually mild. Fasciculations are absent. In a lower motor neuron pattern, the lesion involves the anterior horn cell, nerve root, plexus, or peripheral nerve. Tone is reduced. Reflexes are reduced. The plantar response is downgoing or absent. Wasting is marked. Fasciculations may be present. So when a patient presents with weakness, don't jump directly to a disease name. First ask, is this an upper motor neuron pattern or a lower motor neuron pattern? Upper motor neuron signs push you toward the central nervous system. Lower motor neuron signs push you toward the lower motor neuron pathway. But remember, not all weakness outside the central nervous system is lower motor neuron weakness. The problem can also be at the neuromuscular junction or in the muscle itself. So next, let's separate 3 outside central nervous system causes: lower motor neuron, neuromuscular junction, and muscle. Outside the central nervous system, weakness can come from 3 different places: the lower motor neuron pathway, the neuromuscular junction, or the muscle itself. A lower motor neuron lesion includes the anterior horn cell, nerve root, plexus, or peripheral nerve. These patients often have weakness with sensory loss, reduced reflexes, and sometimes marked wasting or fasciculations. The pattern may follow a nerve or root distribution. In neuromuscular junction disorders, the nerve and muscle may be structurally intact, but transmission between them fails. The key clue is fatigable weakness. Symptoms get worse with repeated use. That is why Myasthenia gravis commonly presents with ptosis, diplopia, bulbar symptoms, normal sensation, and usually normal reflexes. In muscle disease, the nerve is sending the signal, but the muscle cannot generate normal force. The weakness is usually proximal, so patients may struggle with climbing stairs, rising from a chair, or combing their hair. Sensation is normal, and reflexes are preserved early, so the quick differentiation is, sensory loss with reduced reflexes suggests nerve or root, fatigable weakness suggests neuromuscular junction, and proximal weakness with normal sensation suggests muscle. Let's pause for one more active recall. A patient has ptosis and diplopia that are worse by evening, difficulty chewing late in the day, normal sensation, and normal reflexes. What is the most likely site of the problem? Peripheral nerve, neuromuscular junction, muscle, or spinal cord? Pause here and focus on the pattern. The answer is neuromuscular junction. The keyword is fatigability. Symptoms become worse with repeated use or later in the day. Ptosis and diplopia are common because ocular muscles are frequently involved. Difficulty chewing late in the day suggests bulbar fatigability. Sensation is normal because the sensory pathway is not involved. Reflexes are usually normal because the reflex arc is structurally intact. So remember, fatigable weakness with normal sensation strongly points toward a neuromuscular junction disorder. Now let's put the whole approach together. When a patient presents with weakness, don't jump directly to a diagnosis. First, look at the clinical signs. If there are upper motor neuron signs such as increased tone, brisk reflexes, upgoing plantar response, mild wasting, and no fasciculations, think of a lesion in the central nervous system, brain, brainstem, or spinal cord. If there are lower motor neuron signs such as reduced tone, reduced reflexes, downgoing or absent plantar response, marked wasting, and fasciculations, think of the lower motor neuron pathway, anterior horn cell, nerve root, plexus, or peripheral nerve. But if the problem is outside the central nervous system, remember it is not always lower motor neuron disease. It may be the lower motor neuron, the neuromuscular junction, or the muscle. Sensory loss with reduced reflexes points toward nerve or root. Fatigable weakness with normal sensation points toward the neuromuscular junction. Proximal weakness with normal sensation points toward muscle. So the goal is simple. Use clinical signs, localize the lesion, and then think in the right diagnostic direction.
In the next video, we will apply this localization approach to one of the most important topics in neurology, stroke and transient ischemic attack. We will see how sudden weakness, aphasia, visual symptoms, and brainstem signs help us recognize the vascular territory and decide the emergency approach. If this video helped you understand neuroanatomy clinically, like the video, subscribe to MedLogic, and share it with a friend who finds neurology confusing. And most importantly, write your questions in the comments, because your confusion may become the topic of the next MedLogic video. This lecture was prepared using standard medical textbooks of neuroanatomy, clinical neurology, and clinical examination. The main references are listed here for students who want to read further and strengthen their concepts. Thank you.